But in terms of our final session of the day, and I think it's safe to say that this is probably an area where people do maybe think about fintech as a kind of area where fintech is already being used. And this is to do with fighting financial fraud with technology. And certainly from the events that we do, I know that governments and different public sector bodies are increasingly using new technology to help them track down and kind of identify and prevent fraud, I think, as well. So we've got two great speakers. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to invite our speakers to give some scene-setting remarks, and then I'll be coming over to you in the audience for your questions. So our first speaker is Sophie Østerkerhus Jensen, who is head of the supervisory board at the Danish Business Authority, and then we'll have Charlie Boundy, who is chief data officer at Companies House in the United Kingdom. So also nice that you both work in similar areas as well. So Sophie, coming over to you.
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a bit on the insights about our experience and all the challenges using new technology to detect and prevent financial crime and fraud. Just to have the setting, I'm head of the supervision of companies at the Danish Business Authority. We have to supervise that the Danish limited liability companies do compliance with the Danish Company Act, which gives access to accurate data about companies in Denmark to our systems. And also, one of our main goals is trying to prevent money laundering and financial crime and fraud. We supervise around 350,000 companies, and with a yearly registrations around 360 or so. But I don't think for us the journey didn't start with using new technology. The journey started by the digitalization and by having the access to data. That has been the key for us anyway. We had back in, I think it was around 2015, we went totally digitalized any process for handling anything to the Danish Business Agency, meaning that every registration was put in digitally. So we had to no more manual processing of any kind, meaning that you went from a registration taking 3 months to take it hours or minutes. That was very good for businesses in Denmark, but it was also very good for people wanting to use companies for fraud purposes. And that meant that within a very short time we had multiple false identities. We had companies at addresses that wasn't really addresses for any purpose, or could even addresses that didn't exist at all. And the government didn't want to go back on digitization, but they wanted to find some way to how to prevent this from happening. And we started off just trying to get better data by trying to do verifications of the data coming into our systems. But at the same time, we are facing a huge fraud problem with the tax fraud. And the tax fraud, the biggest problem about that is when a company was doing tax fraud. And when you detected it and you tried to stop it, the money would already be gone, so it had huge costs to the government. So we're coming up about ideas to try to prevent this from happening, because if you couldn't prevent a company from being registered, you could prevent them from doing tax fraud. And then some data scientists back in around 2017, I think, 16 maybe, said that I might have some ideas for how we can use machine learning to try to do this. And there was a big support from the government to go down this field and try to what we can do something about with machine learning. But the first thing they said was that we needed the right data to be able to move forward. So we put down legislation to allowing the Danish Business Authority to get data from other authorities in the purpose of trying to prevent financial crime. We started up trying to do machine learning with simple models like checking a document if it's signed, reading through documents, does it fill the standards, checking the passport ID, is it the right name, is it the false passport, and so on. At the same time, we built a large graph database that connects data points, addresses, people, etc., So we could learn something about the company's life cycle and how people and participants in companies. And that led us to the biggest game changer for us was in 2020 when we introduced our fraud model, which is a predictive analysis, which does a predictive analysis to determine whether a company is going to be used for fraud within the next 3 years. And the idea is for the people that I supervise is that we will to stop the registration from happening. This is real-time models in our register, so you put in your data, the model will have a look at it. If it says there's a chance for fraud, it will be stopped, and you have a caseworker having a look at it. We can only stop it if they're actually doing something not compliant for now. We can't not register because we think they're going to do something in the future. It's not Minority Report all over again, but we know if it's at a certain threshold for the model, we know that it will probably already be starting to committing some kind of fraud. In Denmark, it's illegal to put a front man in the company. You have to be the management actually being registered. So that's one of the things that we can actually stop a lot of these companies by. It has been a game changer, and it has saved a huge amount of money for the government. The hard part, one of our biggest challenges is how to show that effect, because how do you show something that's never happened? And also the cost has been more than we imagined from the beginning. It was always about how this would be more efficient, but the thing is that we found out that it is more efficient, and we find the right cases, but we find a lot more cases than we actually thought we would do in the beginning. And also it takes a lot of also manpower just to be able to develop and run models. You have to do evaluations all the time, because otherwise they're gonna stop performing as you want them to. You have to build knowledge, and knowledge is built in people, and people sometimes leave. And it takes a lot of time to make sure that you have the knowledge in the authority to actually keep going forward on this. And then taking the steps to actually do transformation is hard as well, because the caseworkers, they will look at the incremental improvements, small improvements to some idea that if you can just take that, you might be able to stop something, but having to innovate for the big transformers is really, really hard. And as I think it was Steve who talked about what is the problem, and it's an issue with us as well, because everybody's saying you can use AI, you can use language model, you have to do something about that. But what is the problem? What do you want the solution on? Because if you don't know what the problem is, or what we want to do with the machine learning or any AI or language model, you can't use it for anything. And sometimes you find out you have a problem and it's actually better to do with something else than any AI. Yeah. So that's where we are right now.
Sophie, thank you so much. I mean, really interesting to hear the kind of evolution of where you got to. So starting with the digitalization, which I think lots of governments are doing anyway for all sorts of reasons, and then having the data allows you then to use some of these new technologies, move into machine learning. Also, as you say, you know this is bringing lots of benefits, but how do you actually demonstrate that you're creating those benefits, because you're preventing things from happening? And then some of the downsides of this, the costs are maybe higher than people think, even though you're bringing in technology that's making it efficient. You still need that human to be doing the checks. Yeah. And also you're building up that people and knowledge, but people can leave, so you need to kind of redo that all the time. And then finally, that which has come up before as well, needing to be really clear on what the policy question is that you're trying to address before you kind of launch in again with AI or other technologies. Thanks so much, Sophie. Really interesting to hear what you're doing there. And Charlie, I'm curious if that matches maybe what's going on in Companies House in the UK.
Thank you. Actually, yeah, it's been fascinating talking to people from other countries, especially Sophie, to see what the comparisons are for how you register companies and incorporate companies, because it's kind of a gateway for a lot of fraud or money laundering, where people are setting up to try and get legitimacy to then do various kind of transactions within the country or in other jurisdictions. Very similar story. Companies House has been around for a long, long time. As a company registered, we've got about 5.3 million companies, and a huge growth of that over the last 10 years, to be brutally honest. Similarly, filing digitally, you can create a company within minutes and quite cheaply. You can see there's some competitiveness between different countries wanting to make their places good places to do business. The thing that's really exciting for me as a Chief Data Officer is joining an organisation that's already got real-time open data, so that our data has been valued at somewhere between £1 to £3 billion to the economy, but we give it away for free so people can copy and search it to their heart's content. You can see how important companies are to the public, because we get about 14 billion searches a year on it, and that's just average members of the public just wanting to look up a background to a company. We've got more historical use cases like credit reference agencies, government organisations who copy the data to understand how they grant things or allow access to credit and that. The fintech angle is our real-time APIs, where we've got hundreds of people who've signed up to it, and we don't know all of the applications have been put to. But looking at it kind of quite recently, there's a lot of KYC checks, there's a lot of fast access to granting mortgage lending or car finance or online accounting through, very few manual, slow interactions, but very digital. Speed has got its consequences. There's lots of risks that come with that. And we have had that fraudulent use, that the same sort of ID hijacks and money laundering kind of uses. The big difference for Companies House is in the last 6 months we've had new legislation come in that said, right, you now have the power to query, challenge, strike off. The fun one is annotate the register to put various kind of statuses or things that we say, this is something to be aware of. And we're learning, and we're going to have to do quite, I guess, A/B testing type ways of doing things to say, we've trialled this, did it work, what reaction did it have, and those sorts of things. So, in the first couple of months, we've already had several thousand companies move towards strike-off or correction or improvements based on those new powers, and we're learning a lot as we go. And I'm sure we'll get onto it about the sort of technologies that play into that.
Brilliant, thank you so much. It's interesting that both of you said that the digitalisation makes it much easier to register a company, but that then brings its own risk, because it's much easier to set up a false company, which is then the doorway into a lot of some of these criminal issues. I want to pick up on something you both touched on, so data and making data available. So not just making data available for others to use it and increase transparency, but also you talked about the importance of linking data so that you can start to predict maybe where suspicious activity is going on. Can I ask you both, what types of data sets are you linking? And also, are there frustrations in terms of getting access to the data that you think would make a difference? Because one of the things that we hear quite often in our events is there are still lots of silos when it comes to data sharing and lots of barriers to data sharing behind the scenes. So, Charlie, I'll come back to you first on this. What types of data are you using, and do you want more? And is it hard to get hold of more?
You're asking your Chief Data Officer if they want to share more data, aren't you? Okay. It's what's interesting, again, is that a lot of organisations have already had copies of our data for a long time. And they can tell us things back. So I'm almost in the crowdsourcing way of doing things, of saying, if you're seeing things happening, tell us, because people are matching it to their own information, whether, again, that's credit reference agencies or others. So people are matching things to known watch lists, your kind of classic fraud flags and indicators that are used in financial services a lot. I always find that address information is a massive difference, so you want to know if the location of something, the geolocation of something, does that match up with where something was reported online, where the device was at the time? Also, is it residential, is it commercial, is it a service address? All of these sorts of things. So there's watch list type known outcomes, and then there is more contextual things like addresses, and the more you can blend those sorts of things together, the richer picture you have about the relative risks.
Same question to you, Sophie.
Yeah. We have access to some data from other authorities. We would like more, always, I think. I think the hard part is sometimes also getting good data and good structured data, because we have tried getting data that we couldn't use for various reasons. So the data quality is also very important, and it's even in Denmark, where we had almost every agency have been digitalized for many years now. There's still a lot of old legacy data that is hard to combine, and also a lot of the data is in the private sector, and not some. As a government, we have a hard time sharing data with the private companies like banks and so on. Yeah.
And you mentioned in terms of your, I think it was called the tax fraud model, is that right?
Yeah.
The predictive model. And you said obviously you can't stop people doing something before they've done it, but you always bring in the human then to check.
Yeah.
But how accurate, I was wondering, how accurate is that predictive model? So are most of the things that are flagged, are they problematic? What's the kind of percentage there?
It's hard to give you an exact percentage, but it is good. We have done several evaluations on it. It's been on since the end of 2020, so if we get a prediction within 3 years, it's only now that we can actually try to read what it predicted back 3 years ago. But it is very efficient. It has, I think, about 30 features that indicates different stuff. The hard part about it, it's not only tax fraud, it's for various fraud reasons, is that getting people to understand that running bad business isn't the same as being a fraudster. And also being able to have a model that can detect, because it's not illegal to go bankrupt.
Yeah.
But if you do go bankrupt on purpose again and again, then you're heading into something that's illegal. But I can't give you a number, also because we will have a look at all the registrations in the register to monitor the companies, but only when they're actually violating the Company Act can we do something. We will tell the tax authorities if we detect something that we can't do something about, and then it's up to them to take it further.
Further investigation.
Yeah.
Can I just build on that? One of the things that's useful about those sorts of models is for government departments aren't used to building relationships up with ongoing kind of things like dealing with companies. So we're often, for a company register, you're often seen as the kind of front door, and then you might have to file something annually and so on. But if you've got an idea of the relative risks of different companies, you've got a chance to put in more of a, I guess, a more classic customer relationship management kind of thinking, or ways that you might say, well, we've done lots of stuff with nudge approaches of, if we send something to remind somebody to file on time who's highly likely not to, there's not an awful lot of consequences of getting that sort of thing wrong or feeling like you're tarring somebody with a brush of being fraudulent. You're not. But it gives you a chance to have more cost-effective relationships or behaviours, which is something which a lot of the commercial sector does every day, but government departments are still learning how to.
And my final question for now, before I come to the audience, so obviously you're getting smarter at doing the detection work, but are the bad actors getting smarter at using technology to kind of cover their actions as well? So is it getting harder to detect fraud, and are they using technology themselves to kind of, get away with what they're doing? So Charlie, you're nodding. So is it kind of a bit of a race, and who's going to get ahead?
So fraud's never going to go away. It is always going to be a cat and mouse game. I sort of feel that as you make your identity things more sophisticated, then the sophistication of the identity frauds are going to get more sophisticated and harder to detect. The challenge for organisations is to be agile and not spend 2 years building a system and then hoping that system's going to live forever, because it's not. That's why fintech organisations that you can call out to services and then drop them if they're no longer working and get new ones. It's being more, I guess, configurable as organisations, because that cat and mouse thing will constantly happen.
Yeah.
And you're right. I've had examples of where people have used generative AI to generate their CVs and job applications, because they're trying to make it look like they've got all the skills they need to get people inside the organisations as well as what you might see outside the organisation. So you have to be really aware that AI is going to be used for and against us.
Thanks. Sophie?
Yeah, I agree totally. Also about the agile thing, because some of this is like the fraud model, it's taken us years to build, and we changed the direction several times because things change all the time, and things are moving very fast. What we thought we could do when we started looking at it in 2017 or 18 wasn't the same as the technology was available in 2020. And we're still building on it, so you have to develop all the time. Also, when you're looking for fraud, you tend to be looking at where the fraud is right now, and if you keep focusing on that, you will miss where they're moving to, because it's moving all the time. Yeah.
So it's that balancing act again that you said. You need to be doing your day job, but always also looking at what's coming down the road.
The other thing is we don't know what all the fraud is. No. We don't know what the incentives are. It might be, it's not just fraud against us as an organisation. It's happening in jurisdictions which people could register UK companies, but the fraud is happening in a completely different country, and we don't know why or what the rationale is. And without being able to unpick some of those things, it's quite hard to stop.
Yeah. We've got a hand up. Ian wants to come in here, and then I'll take questions from anyone else in the room as well.
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan. Obviously, this is it's great to see you guys kind of, who I don't think have met before, kind of interacting, and the amount of kind of common ground that you do have. But what are other kind of ongoing international channels for organisations such as your own to share information, and how efficient are they? So much of this, as you kind of said, is crossing border. And the second question, if I may, is just Charlie again kind of alluded to it, but to what extent you actually work with the private sector. They're obviously rapidly developing solutions, which I'm sure they're keen to sell to you, but to what extent do you already do that?
Is your first question, Ian, about channels to share good practice, or is it collaborating on data, for example?
Yeah, both actually, yeah. I mean, I meant it, yeah, I interpret it in both. I'm interested in both.
And then working with the private sector. Yeah. Yeah. Charlie, come to you first.
If I start, so in the company register world, there is an international group who meet very regularly and compare things that they're aware of and they can see happening. Although there are still pockets of things where there isn't a global register, for example, and I think driving towards those sorts of things could really help to see cross-boundary activity and ownership and shareholding and directorships and that sort of thing, beneficial ownership, all of these sorts of things. So there's lots of transparency groups pushing towards that, and there's obviously there's movements towards it, but it could be quicker, I guess. Sorry, the second question was?
Working with the private sector.
Working with the private sector. So yes, there's two angles to it. There's one which is sharing what we know about fraud against us, because sometimes it's the same actors, sometimes it's the same MOs, and that shouldn't feel like there's a barrier of having to have a commercial relationship to make that intelligence be shared. But equally, there's plenty of organisations out there who are creating fantastic technology for us to actually integrate with. We've got some really good things in the UK with Public Sector Fraud Authority. They've created something with a fintech organisation, which is one of the world's leading ones, and we can consume from that. Yeah, there is some brilliant things out there, and I think the point is, like I was saying a minute ago, is having that defence in depth, because it's not just one thing is going to cure all fraud, it's layers, because people are going to start working through your defences.
Sophie, did you want to come in on either of those questions?
About the first one, the international perspective, there's a lot of different ways that business registers is being run across Europe even, and it's not always the same people having the register as the authority actually having to prevent fraud, and so it's sometimes hard to pick up on the business cases where they have the exact same setup as you. That being said, we do talk to a lot of other countries, both with similar and different setups, but the thing about sharing data across borders, it would be a game changer, and it's not what's happening right now.
And so what are the biggest barriers to sharing data across borders?
Not all registers are open. I think there is there's there's a lot of, a company register may sound simple, but actually there's quite a lot of complexity behind it. And there's a company up front, but ownership of companies, like I said, shareholders, significant control, companies, company secretaries, directors, etc., etc. And some of that does have a lot of privacy attached to it because it's home addresses, residential addresses, that sort of thing. And to be honest, some of it is not, in some areas, not that clean.
Right.
So there's some data quality issues that might be a bit embarrassing.
Yeah.
But to be honest, when you make it completely open, people point that stuff out pretty quick.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yes, there's one here, and then there's a gentleman at the back as well. Thanks.
Sorry, you kind of have addressed it in one sense in that last response, but I noticed that the MLA in Singapore recently opened up a new mechanism for P2P reporting. So, for example, a bank filing a suspicious activity report can share with peer groups, which I think is phenomenal because I'm speaking from an industry perspective. If I decline business, if I terminate a client for cause, they're going to go knocking on another door. Why do you want to let that happen when, I ultimately understand the beneficial ownership, registers in certain jurisdictions are not yet kind of, they're not comfortable with disclosing for many legitimate reasons. But when it comes to bad actors, when it comes to illicit activity, surely it's the benefit to all to make those as transparent as possible between industry peers in an obviously protected manner.
Shall I take that one? I do agree. What's opened doors up for us a lot recently is that we've got new powers which include things around law enforcement and sharing with law enforcement partners and vice versa. So previously we were a register and therefore some of the law enforcement agencies wouldn't share some of their intelligence directly with us because we didn't have those kind of statuses. Now we do, like I say with the suspicious activity reports, a lot of that is, we're now getting access to those data sets.
Yeah, and we do have access to a lot of, we went through the same thing 10 years ago or so, so from being just a register who didn't do anything about fraudsters or anything being wrong in the system to now being a supervision authority.
Thanks, Sophie. We've got a question at the back, and then George, we've got a question, Peter, down here on the front table. If you could stick your hand up, and then George can bring the mic to you. Thanks. Yes, at the back.
Hi, just a question of how successful has AI been in combating tax fraud? There's been a couple of very interesting stories already today. I think it was Steve's about the Mexican tax authority in particular. I've been made aware of a similar story from our own revenue commissioners of using AI and satellite imagery in deciding where to send inspectors to direct them toward farmers who have been availing of farmland tax relief, maybe not illicitly, but you know the story. So I was just wondering, how successful in your experience has it been in combating tax fraud? Are there any other interesting use cases that you can see in your work?
Thanks. So how successful has AI been in combating tax fraud? And if you were here last year, I'm getting a flashback now to Dominic and his sausage seller at this point. But it wasn't AI, but it was a very interesting use case. But Sophie?
It's when you focus a lot, what we focused on the last years, because we've been going through this transformation, has been to trying to prevent and trying to stop fraud companies. When we stop a company, usually because they have a frontman, because they have an address that's not accurate, because of something similar to that. So what fraud is actually going to be committed in that company can be hard to say anything about. And that's a hard part about this sometimes. We get fed back data and information from the police and other cases to try to get us more information about what's going on. But we have, the tax fraud has been what started it all, but yeah, I don't. It's hard to pinpoint out exactly the effects on different kind of fraud.
So maybe AI is used slightly differently. That would be more a different case. If you don't believe maybe what people are saying they're actually doing, then that would be that kind of example would be more useful. Charlie, your thoughts?
It's a bit of a mean question because I'm not revenue and customs, and I know that they do a lot in the UK I mean, they have some fantastic uses of technology. I did work there a while ago, so I'd be using very out-of-date information if I did. However, I think the point is, you've got a really good point about image recognition for the credibility of certain things. You've got a really good point about entity resolution, so can we make connections which people are deliberately trying to obscure? Now they know that technology is used, so that's extracting information from large amounts of text or accounts or things like that. And it's not just NLP, it's actually trying to say make sense of that information, which is another level on for generative AI. And the one that is just going to be increasingly more and more brilliant is around identity verification and verification of documents and moving images and those sorts of things. So I'm overwhelmed with interest in that space.
And I mean, one of my questions was going to be, to what extent is AI going to be used in future? And I guess it's just got endless possibilities, I think. Thank you. We've got a question down here, Peter.
Appreciate, maybe this is you can only answer this question on a personal basis, but do you ever see a time where at least a certain category of companies, when they're being established, be put through the equivalent of a AML CDD verification process by a company registrar, so that once it's fully identified, then the next layer of those who may do business with it are comfortable that there has been the verification. It may not be perceived to be a role of a company's registrar now, but for the right fee, surely there must be some thinking around that.
I'm going to steal Sandy's idea that he told me last night at the pub. Wave, Sandy, you're out there, aren't you? Yeah, fantastic. We were talking about how far you could go with fintech and international payments between companies. Was a question we were saying, well, you know, a lot of us talk about identity and privacy of individuals and making payments to each other, but if you're dealing with between companies, how much can you be confident that that company is legitimate, et cetera, et cetera? So he was talking about financial passports, almost like something which says, I could generate something and between payments between two organisations internationally, why isn't that based on a financial passport, digital certificate being in that transaction? So that might involve, like you're saying, some due diligence around the company and some behaviours of the company recently, rather than the company's 20 minutes old and it's now trying to do some transactions. So, yeah, let's push the boundaries, keep exploring that.
So, do you want to add anything? No. Steve, you've got a question.
Yeah, it's just to add more context to the example I gave. In Latin America, it wasn't just Mexico, it was Brazil as well. And so with the anomaly detection and the beneficial ownership, that was several billion in terms of the quantifiable amount of money saved. It was several billion, but it also highlighted the connection between the companies, like I said earlier, but it also highlighted the connection with the cartels in Brazil as well, that we didn't know the connection to that. And like you said before, if you're just looking at one country, the actual bad actors are outside the country as well. So we've connected it up with Moody's, and that's 450 million companies around the world where you can make the connections. And actually those two solutions, we're talking about the anomaly detection and the beneficial, are free solutions, which is, I know is surprising from Microsoft. But they do the connections and it is quantifiable. That's the example I know in detail, but the more it's getting used, and that now is being rolled out to so many different countries to try and spot those connections. So just to give you the detail.
Thanks. Any other questions? No. So my final question to both of you is kind of how do you see this evolving then? What's the next big thing in terms of the technology that you think you'll be deploying to make the system even more efficient, even more accurate?
I think identification, AI of sorts for that. That would be one of the main things. And I think for us as a Danish Business Authority, where we are right now, it's actually not about the technology more than it's about the data, what we do with data, and looking into to having more data on the money movements will make a huge improvement at some point.
It's kind of what we've been saying in the past. You need the foundations in place to be able to embrace the tech. Charlie?
Oh, I see a future where I can have a conversation with the register. No, I'm joking.
In the metaverse?
No, yeah, I knew I'd regret saying that. No, so there is... there's a lot within government of interest of trying to do something around filing once with government. So smoothing those journeys between dealing with lots of departments and it's being something a bit more interoperable across government. So there's a lot of great work in terms of trying to standardise and come up with common identifiers and things like that. But and standards around accounting, tagging and things as well is a big deal. So filing once with government is kind of an ambition to make sure that it is easy. You can multi-channel choices. There's less remembering to tell one department and another and keeping your circumstances in mind. So Brilliant. I think it's pushing those things.
So lots about more joining up as well and better data. Thank you so much, Sophie and Charlie, and thanks for all those questions. Really good to have all that engagement in the last kind of final big panel session of the day. Thank you so much for your input.